So, Mega Man X was the game that got me interested in the Mega Man franchise, though at the time I gave up trying to defeat the final boss of that game and just wanted to move on. So I decided to immediately jump into Mega Man X2. And just like with the previous game, I did use Clement J64's LP as a guide for whenever I got stuck. In fact, with the exception of Mega Man 11, I actually used all of his classic Mega Man X, and Mega Man Zero LPs as guides for whenever I got stuck with those games, so I won't be repeating that for any of my future Mega Man reviews. Though, unlike the first game, I've actually managed to finish Mega Man X2 at the time, and as a result ended up being the first Mega Man game I've ever finished. Does this mean I think it's better than the original? Well, not necessarily. I'll save my thoughts for the actual review. That being said, let's talk about Mega Man X2. 6 months after Sigma's defeat, Mega Man X and the rest of the Maverick Hunters continue to hunt down Sigma's followers. With new information gained by Dr. Cain, Mega Man X and the Maverick Hunters track down the last of the Mavericks to an abandoned factory. Little do they know that the real war is just about to begin. When X and this green biker dude reach the factory, well, so much for that guy. X destroys this giant robot known as a Mechanoid, and it's then revealed that X is actually being secretly watched by these three sinister Mavericks known as the X-Hunters, consisting of Surges, Agile, and Violin. After watching X destroy the giant Mechanoid in the abandoned factory, they send in 8 more Mavericks to distract X while they attempt to complete their master plan. After X destroys 2 of their Mavericks, the X-Hunters decide to contact Maverick Hunter HQ, in which they reveal that they have collected the remaining parts of Zero, who was destroyed near the end of the first game in the series. They challenge X to a duel and agree to surrender Zero's parts to him if X can defeat them. Dr. Cain then reveals to X that Zero's control chip is still stored at Maverick Hunter HQ, prompting X to chase after the X-Hunters while destroying any Mavericks that get in his way. Now, before I start talking about the gameplay, I should definitely mention this. Despite this being a new game, X doesn't have his armor set, heart tanks, and sub-tanks from the previous game, and it's like that for just about every other game in the series. It's never explained why, but the game would probably be too easy if X did have everything from the previous game. The only upgrade X keeps in this game is the leg upgrade from the previous game, which allows X to dash and make longer jumps. This is made standard for this game and onwards, so yeah. Anyway, let's finally talk about the gameplay. Much like the previous game, X can run, jump, dash, and shoot pellets out of his X-Buster that can also be charged for a more powerful blast. And he can collect heart tanks and sub-tanks hidden in each level, which behave exactly how they did in the previous game. Also like the first game, X can find hidden armor capsules left behind by Dr. Light to give X new parts that increase his abilities, though they behave quite differently in this game. I already mentioned before that X can now dash by default, but with the leg parts, X can also dash in midair. The head parts allow X to scan the area for hidden secrets such as breakable walls. The body parts not only double X's defense, but also give X access to the Giga Crush. This attack isn't very useful against major bosses, but it does destroy every small enemy on screen, and can even help against certain mini-bosses. But by far the best parts you can collect in this game are the arm parts. Besides allowing X to charge his special weapons, they also allow him to get a second X-Buster that can also be charged, allowing X to get 2 charge shots that he can fire out of both arms. These are without a doubt my favorite arm parts in the entire Mega Man X series. Not only because of how useful they are against regular enemies, but also because they can be very helpful against certain bosses as well. The levels are pretty well designed for the most part, but sometimes the hidden armor capsules, heart tanks, and sub-tanks can be a bit too well hidden at times. You most likely won't find these during your first playthrough blind and may have to look up a guide to find most of them. Most of the boss fights are well designed, but some are clearly more challenging than others. That being said, let's talk about the X-Hunters. After defeating 2 Mavericks, the X-Hunters will start showing up in regular stages, allowing you to fight them in the middle of whatever stage they're currently in. But be careful. If you defeat too many of the 8 Mavericks before defeating all 3 of the X-Hunters, they'll stop appearing in the stages and you'll lose your chance at getting Zero rebuilt at Maverick Hunter HQ. These guys can also be very challenging depending on your route. The fights against Agile and Surges aren't too bad if you can get a pattern memorized, but Violin is just painfully annoying to fight, especially if you're going after him first. Every time I go after him first, I just cannot beat him without using at least 1 sub-tank, because I swear his attacks are completely random, and I especially hate this stupid ball and chain attack that goes all over the place. Granted, the X-Hunter fights are completely optional, but I personally always feel the need to go after them in just about every playthrough because, well, Zero is my favorite character, so of course I'm going to always save him. The game also requires certain backtracking to previously completed stages with certain weapons acquired if you want to get every hidden collectible in the stage. It doesn't really bother me personally, but I know that it might annoy some other players. Another thing worth mentioning is that unlike the previous game, stages don't change after defeating certain Mavericks anymore, so every stage is the same on repeated playthroughs. Doesn't really bother me personally, but yeah. As for what I think of the game, I actually really like it. It's not one of my favorite Mega Man games, but I certainly enjoy it. I absolutely love the new set of armor that X can get, and the levels are pretty fun to travel through as well. And I actually really love most of the boss fights in this game, although I still find Violin painfully annoying. The special weapons, on the other hand, I feel are pretty lacking. If I'm not using them to get upgrades, I'm most likely using them to defeat bosses and mini-bosses easier. Some of the weapons are pretty useful, but most of them aren't as good at defeating enemies as the X-Buster. Graphically speaking, it looks even better than the previous game. Unlike the previous game, Mega Man X2 uses a special chip known as the CX4 chip. It basically allows the game to have some cool wireframe effects. Even today I still think it looks cool for a SNES game. Musically speaking, I actually really do like the soundtrack overall, but this is one of those cases in which I feel like the soundtrack sounds better remixed or covered. I don't really mind most of the instruments used for this game, but there's one particular instrument that can sound a bit distracting at times. Overall, Mega Man X2 is a pretty solid game and a pretty good follow-up to the original Mega Man X. I may not care for the special weapons, that one instrument used for the music, and I do think some of the boss fights can be pretty annoying at times, but I feel like the core gameplay makes up for it. Not quite as good as the previous game, but still pretty enjoyable. If you love the original Mega Man X, consider giving the sequel a try, and who knows, you may enjoy it more than I do. That being said, I give this game a 7 out of 10.